With its magnificent, detailed motifs and unique history, the Barney Library is truly one of the most vital and beautiful historical buildings in Farmington. The Barney Library, its founders, and its beautiful, fascinating history should be preserved for future generations of Farmington. This library is not named after the purple dinosaur, but after one of the most influential and wealthiest men in our history, as well as the reason the building is standing today, Mr. Danford Newton Barney. He put in all of his efforts into making Farmington better one step at a time. However, he surely wasn't the only person behind the library or the only person in his family who had a large impact on Farmington. Danford Newton Barney was born in Berlin, Connecticut. He later moved to Farmington, his precious town, with his parents, who were his widowed mother and his aunt. His mother, Sarah Elizabeth Brandegee Barney, and his aunt, Miss Julia Sophia Brandegee, were both passionate librarians. As soon as Miss Julia moved to Farmington, she fired up a small library which grew into our Barney Library. She was very patient and always wanted the best for everyone, young and elderly alike. In the Historical Resources Inventory for the Barney Library, it says, Miss Brandegee was a picturesque figure in Farmington. Her interest in the young was very marked. She wanted all the children to have food for their minds as well as for their bodies. For some years, Mrs. Newton Barney, with Miss Brandegee, gave a Christmas party at the town hall for all the village children. Both women were attached to Farmington and wanted the best for all of its citizens, and thus the idea of a free public library was ignited. Mr. Barney was from a wealthy family and was involved in our community in many ways. He was a president and incorporator of the Farmington Country Club in 1901. He was the treasurer of the Hartford Electric Light Company for 30 years, in which his son was also involved in. Moreover, in 1935, Mr. Barney and his wife restored the Stanley Whitman House and donated it to the Farmington Valley Green and Library Association, aka the FVGLA. Clearly, the members of the Brandegee/Barney family had a huge impact on Farmington, and their legacy is still carried on. It's not very surprising that in 1882, Miss Brandegee started a library across the street from their home on Perkins Corner. It was called the Tungus Library and only started out with 14 books. Thomas L. Porter, the librarian of the Farmington Library, came to see her with the greeting, "I want to know what you are doing to run out the town library." He told her that there were not enough people paying 50 cents a year to borrow books to cover a salary of $5. Miss Julia and her biblioteca were quite a hit in Farmington, and so in 1888, when a new town hall was being laid out, a small nook was reserved for a public library. The Farmington and Tungus libraries were merged, and when construction was completed in 1890, Miss Julia Brandegee was appointed as the librarian. Miss Brandegee had created a new library system that opened a new door for young readers and brought people together through books. Miss Julia was well over satisfied with this progress. However, her final dream was to see the books under her charge shifted to a separate library building. In 1901, her dream was voiced, but productive action toward the goal was made in 1909 by none other than Mr. Danford Newton Barney, her nephew. But how was he part of this? Amazing coincidence or master scheme? Well, let's find out. It all started with the will of Miss Porter, which announced the formation of the Village Green and its trustees, or the Village Green Association. She transferred ownership of most of her land, accompanied with a large sum of money, to these 7 men. She also had specific requirements for the organization. However, when Mr. Barney Sr. joined the organization, he did not ask for permission and brought along 2 of his friends. When the organization applied to the state legislature, their name was the Farmington Village Green and Library Association. On May 9th, 1909, Mr. Barney introduced the idea of a free public library to the other trustees. He said it was to be named in memory of his mother, who had died a year earlier. Since Mr. Barney had enough power, money, and determination to create the building, he went ahead on his own. Here are the remarks of town historian Mrs. Betty Coy Kendall on the proposition of Mr. Barney.
Mr. Barney made that decision very, very easy for the rest of the Board of Trustees of the FVGLA. At that time, the church owned the land there, and he arranged with the church a 199-year lease that was only going to cost the FVGLA $1 per year. Then he paid with his own money to have the library built. Now, what board of trustees would say no to this kind of a deal? They got a free building, they got the money to run it, and it was all handed to them, and they didn't have to do anything except vote. And they did. As one aside, I'd like to say that during that period, Andrew Carnegie nationally was giving towns money to build public libraries. It was a big thing to do then. And we had our own local Andrew Carnegie, and his name was D. Newton Barney.
Voila! Farmington had its main public library. Even though Mr. Barney broke Miss Porter's strict rule for the organization's members, he gave it a gift that still shows its wonders 100 years later. If one has ever stepped inside the Barney Library, they know that the intricate designs and patterns throughout the building amaze the visitor. A mix of architecture styles from the Greeks, the Romans, and the Renaissance, every room of the library is designed in such a way that many are drawn to it. In 100 years, the library has went through many renovations. In the first major renovation after the original construction, the children's wings was added on, which slightly disturbed the symmetrical design of the library. Then, in 2009, the foundation of the building was found to be a little weak, so they tore down the middle of the building and fixed the foundation. Many other critical changes were also made. Mr. Alan Kendall, a member of the renovation committee of 2009, remarks,
"The Barney Library is a very fine example of classic Greek architecture. The Greeks built buildings, mostly temples, with peaked roofs supported by columns. The columns support beams. In the front of a classic Greek building, the beams are decorated in certain patterns. The Barney style, or pattern, is called Doric. There are similar Greek features inside many of the classic houses of Farmington."
The Barney Library truly influenced the surroundings in terms of design as well. So why does this all matter? It is Farmington's first official public library, but so what? The Barney Library opened a door for the town of Farmington, a door leading to knowledge and diversity for all who visit it or the other branches of the Farmington Public Libraries. Its connection to one of the most influential families of Farmington brought it to where it is today. It also stands as a reminder of its unique history and the people who selflessly contributed to its community.